They thought she was just a nurse, someone to clean up after the real soldiers, quiet, forgettable, maybe even fragile. They had no idea they were about to learn what discipline, legacy, and precision truly looked like. Her name was Cassandra Cass. Blake, 32 years old, brown hair always tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail, slate-grey eyes that never gave away a thing. She showed up at Redstone civilian training grounds with little fanfare, applied for a simple support role, medical assistant, no military title, no demand for respect, she just appeared. And for most of the men they're veterans, hot-headed recruits, and arrogant instructors, she didn't matter enough to look twice. To them, she was furniture. And that's exactly how she liked it. Cass kept to herself, working quietly in the shadows. She stocked medical cabinets, cleaned wounds without flinching, and wiped down dusty training rifles like they were her responsibility alone. Most of the trainees barely remembered to say thank you, and those who did called her things like sweetheart, darlin', or most commonly, nurse no, it, all. Sergeant Frank Doherty, a gruff ex-Marine with too many medals and not enough patience, loved using that one in particular. Nurse know-it-all. Clean up the shooting range. He'd bark while tossing a towel in her direction. Hey, nurse know-it-all. How about you restock the med tent before pretending you're a soldier again? Cass never flinched. She never corrected them. She just nodded once and did the job. Efficiently. Perfectly. Like a machine with a soul. But one incident changed everything. It was supposed to be a routine afternoon. Clear skies, nothing unusual, just another set of marksmanship drills. But during one of the live-fire exercises, a young recruit mishandled his rifle. It recoiled hard. The butt slammed back into his collarbone, slicing him open just above the shoulder. The gash was deep, bleeding fast. For a full 3 seconds, no one moved. Then Cass did. She appeared beside the fallen recruit like smoke. No panic, no shouting, just movement precise, surgical, trained. Her hands clamped the artery exactly where it needed pressure. She controlled the bleeding faster than most medics would in full gear. When someone screamed, "We need a medic," she replied without looking up, "I am handling it." No one asked where she learned how to really handle it. No one asked why her field dressing was textbook perfect. They just clapped a little and moved on. Only Sergeant Doherty seemed suspicious, but instead of asking questions, he just smirked wider. "Well, nurse know it. All really does know it all, huh?" He laughed loudly for everyone to hear. "How about you take over maintenance on the firing rifles tomorrow? Wouldn't want us amateurs breaking them again." The men laughed. Cass didn't. That night, while everyone else was at mess hall swapping stories and flirting with new recruits, Cass sat alone in the medical bay. She cleaned her instruments with the same quiet focus she gave everything else. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she adjusted the knobs on an old field scope, her fingers moving with reverent care. On her wrist was a battered, sun-faded military watch. She never took it off, and sometimes, when she thought no one could see, she'd place her palm gently over it like someone whispering to the past. In her small quarters, on a metal shelf above her cot, there was a photograph, black and white, slightly cracked. It showed a man in full military dress, sharp jaw, piercing eyes, deadly calm. His name was Jack Phantom, Blake-own of the most feared snipers in Gulf War history. His shot never missed, not once. He was also her father. Cass had grown up under his shadow literally. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., while other kids were dreaming of cereal and cartoons, she was out in the field with Jack, learning wind patterns, light distortion, and how silence could be deadlier than noise. Her world was shaped by crosshairs and stillness, breath control and bullet drop. But after he died 3 years ago, she walked away from that life, from the military, from rifles, from everything. She had promised herself she would never pick up a weapon again. Until now. Because the next morning, Sergeant Doherty made an announcement, one that would crack the calm shell around her once and for all. "We're doing a base-wide marksmanship test today," he said, arms crossed, voice booming. "Everyone's in, even the support staff. That means you too, nurse know-it-all." He tossed her an M24 sniper rifle like it was a joke. The others laughed. Someone whispered, "Bet she can't even load it." Cass stared at the weapon. Her fingers trembled for just a second. Then she heard her father's voice in her mind. "It's not about the shot, Cassie. It's about the moment before it. The breath, the stillness, the knowing." She didn't say a word, just stepped quietly toward the firing line. The crowd shifted. Some chuckled. Others made bets. Nobody knew what was coming. But they were about to find out. Cass stepped up to the firing line like she was walking into a quiet memory. The rifle in her hands wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it felt inevitable. She moved, slowly, calmly, brushing her fingers along the scope with the care of someone handling something sacred. The same way she used to clean her father's rifle when she was barely tall enough to reach the workbench. Sergeant Doherty was already grinning wide, arms folded across his chest. "All right, Nurse Know-It-All," he barked, loud enough for the whole group to hear. "Let's see if you can hit anything beyond 10 feet. The range was set at 300 meters, not a casual shot. For most people here, it required focus, calculation, and nerves of steel. For Cass, it was barely warm-up range. She didn't say a word, didn't look at anyone. The world around her faded. Her shoulders relaxed. Her stance shifted no longer the posture of a meek assistant, but of a trained marksman, a professional, her left elbow tucked in. Her breathing slowed. Her trigger finger hovered in space like it already knew the moment to strike. And then, silence. Even the chuckling stopped. Something in the way she moved made people uneasy, like watching a candle flicker in a room that was suddenly far too quiet. One of the older instructors, Sergeant Jameson, tilted his head. His eyes narrowed as he watched her grip the rifle, adjust the scope, and settle it against her cheek with eerie confidence. "Wait a minute," he muttered. She exhaled, held her breath, squeezed the trigger. Boom. The crack echoed like a whip across the open field. The spotting scope zoomed in. Someone gasped. Dead center. Not just a bullseye, a perfect center shot. The bullet had pierced the exact mathematical middle of the target, not by chance, not luck, but by choice. The entire firing range fell absolutely still. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The nurse wasn't supposed to outshoot the recruits. She wasn't even supposed to know how to handle a sniper rifle. But she hadn't just handled it, she had dominated it. Sergeant Jameson suddenly took 2 steps forward, eyes fixed on her stance. His mouth opened slightly. "That's shooting style," he said, almost to himself. "That's Jack Blake's technique." Everyone around him froze. Jack Blake? Jack Phantom Blake? The name moved like electricity through the crowd. Some of the older veterans exchanged looks. Others whispered under their breath. Cass still hadn't moved. She slowly lowered the rifle and stepped away from the line without fanfare. No smile, no pride, just calm, collected, complete. Sergeant Doherty opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence did more damage than 100 clever insults ever could. From that moment on, everything shifted. The next few days were different. The mockery didn't exactly stop, but it lost its confidence. The remarks were fewer, the tones more cautious. When she passed through the corridors, people watched her a little longer. The whispers behind her back were no longer about how useless she was, but about who she really was. "Nah, no way. Can't be her. Dude, did you see that shot? No one does that without serious training. I heard her dad was military, like elite." She didn't correct them. She didn't need to. But for Sergeant Doherty, the loss of control stung worse than a wound. So when the opportunity came, he took it. It was a surprise base-wide alert, a scheduled tactical simulation exercise top-level clearance. It was supposed to test reaction time, chain of command, evacuation drills, and most importantly, defensive awareness under pressure. The simulation used live gear, minus the ammo. Snipers would operate with paint round-sharmless from distance, but painful and dangerous up close. Everyone was briefed. Everyone was ordered to evacuate to underground bunkers the moment the siren sounded. But something went wrong. A unit of new recruits still green, barely a weak ingot separated. They were stuck in the Eastern Administrative Building, completely unaware that the simulation sniper team was moving straight toward them. They had 10 minutes before contact. Rescue teams would need 20. It was just an exercise. But the danger was very, very real. Cass stood among the crowd in the bunker as the announcement crackled over the loudspeakers. Her mind worked faster than her heartbeat. She knew the base layout better than anyone. She had cleaned every hallway, every window, every corner of every building. She also knew one terrifying truth. There was only one vantage point with a clear line of sight to the eastern entrance. The old admin tower. If someone didn't take the shot, those recruits would be exposed. And then, the quiet decision. Cass didn't ask for orders. She just moved. Slipping out of the bunker like a shadow, she made her way to the armory. The same M24 rifle from the marksmanship test was still secured in its case. Her fingers moved over the lock pad like muscle memory. The rifle clicked open. No hesitation. By the time the tactical officers realized she was gone, Cass was already on the second floor of the admin tower, adjusting the tripod and scanning the field through her scope. 800 meters. Crosswind, 15 miles per hour, northwest. Slight, elevation. Target, 3 moving figures in tactical gear closing in fast. She took one breath, then another. Her father's voice echoed once more. When lives are on the line, there's no second place. There's only the shot that matters. Cass exhaled and fired. Thwack. The rifle cracked like thunder, and silence followed as if the air itself held its breath. Through the scope, Cass watched as the lead simulation sniper staggered, their body sensor blinking bright reader, direct center mass hit, instant disqualification. The entire exercise halted. Radios crackled with the official call. Threat neutralized, simulation terminated, all personnel safe. But Cass didn't celebrate. She simply lowered the rifle and began breaking it down with the same mechanical precision her father taught her. Bolt out, chamber cleared, barrel cooled, no wasted motion. Behind her, the sound of boots on metal stairs echoed up the corridor. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. A deep voice spoke behind her. "Jack told me you'd do this someday." Cass looked up. A tall man in an officer's uniform stood in the doorway. Lieutenant Colonel Ellis, a legend in his own right. He had served 3 tours with Jack Phantom Blake. The resemblance in his eyes when he looked at Cass was unmistakable. No, just recognition, but reverence. He stepped closer and offered a crisp salute. Not out of formality, out of respect. "I knew it the moment you picked up that rifle during the test," he said. "Your hands, your breathing. I've only seen one person move like that." He paused, voice softer now. "Your father didn't train killers, he trained protectors, and today, you honored that." Cass didn't reply, but her eyes said everything. By the time the rest of the personnel reached the admin tower, the whispers had already started. "She made that shot from where? Who is she, really?" They said it was 800 meters, uphill, in crosswind. And then someone asked the real question, who taught her to shoot like that? Sergeant Jameson was the first to speak it aloud. That wasn't just a good shot. That was Phantom's shot. His voice trembled. "I saw him take it once in Iraq. Same stance, same wind read, same everything." Everyone turned toward Cass, who now stood silently beside the dismantled rifle. The silence grew heavy, reverent. Even Sergeant Doherty, always smug, always in control, couldn't look her in the eye. His lips moved, searching for a comeback. Nothing came out. Coach Martinez, another veteran instructor who had dismissed her earlier in the week, approached slowly. I didn't know," he mumbled, eyes down. "You weren't supposed to," Cass replied, voice quiet but steady. In that moment, the dynamic shifted completely. The nurse who once fetched medical kits and cleaned up after others had become the silent center of gravity. No rank, no orders, just pure earned authority. But the story didn't end there. 3 days later, Cass was summoned to the command office. Inside, Colonel Ellis handed her a sealed envelope. "He left this with me before he passed," the colonel said. "Told me to give it to you only when you proved something to yourself." Inside was a letter handwritten, creased at the corners. "Cassie, if you're reading this, it means you used your skills when it mattered most. Not because someone told you to, not to impress anyone, but because you knew it was right. You've honored our promise. I trained you to be calm in the chaos, not for medals, but for meaning. And today, you were exactly who the world needed you to be. I'm proud of you, Dad." Cass closed her eyes. Her fingers brushed the worn military watch on her wrist, the one he had given her the day he retired. She felt the weight of it now, not as a burden, but as a bond. The fallout was immediate. Offers started pouring in. High-level military units, special operations teams, defense contractors, sniper schools. Every one of them wanted her. Some dangled 6-figure bonuses. Others promised command-level titles. Cass declined them all. She didn't come to Redstone to be a legend. She came to help. "I'm not here to be a weapon. she told Colonel Ellis during a private meeting. "I'm here to heal, to teach, to pass something on." And teach she did, but not with lectures or podiums. Her classroom was the field. Her method? Silence, observation, and one well-placed sentence at the right time. Coach Cass, the recruits began calling her not mockingly, but with real respect. Instead of jeers, they now came to her with notebooks and questions. Can you check my grip? How do I control my breath under pressure? What do I do when my hands shake before the shot? She never sought the spotlight. But now, they gathered around her during lunch breaks, followed her to the range, shadowed her while she cleaned rifles. Sergeant Doherty stopped using her nickname. In fact, he stopped speaking altogether when she walked into the room. Not because he feared her, but because now he finally saw her. Weeks passed, and the base never quite returned to normal. Something had shifted not in routines or procedures, but in the hearts of the people. The story of the nurse with the phantom shot traveled from one end of Redstone to the other, spreading like a whispered legend, but it didn't come with fanfare. There were no medals, no press releases, just quiet reverence. People simply began showing up. Recruits who once ignored Cass now sat beside her during breaks, asking about wind drift and stance. Instructors who had dismissed her offered nods of respect in passing. The armory even began setting aside a particular M24 rifle marked with a faded blue ribbon on the grip. Everyone knew whose hands it belonged to. But Cass never bragged, never claimed authority. She still worked the night shifts in the medical bay, still cleaned the equipment with care, still walked the corridors with soft footsteps and eyes that seemed to look 1,000 yards ahead. The only real difference? Now, they listened. Even Sergeant Doherty, once the loudest voice in the room, now avoided eye contact. One afternoon, he caught her outside the range as she was packing away a cleaned kit. "I didn't know," he muttered. Cass looked up, unreadable. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I should have paid attention." There was a pause. Cass tilted her head slightly. "You weren't supposed to," she said, then gently closed the case and walked away. Not cold, not angry, just complete. One evening, just after sunset, Colonel Ellis found her on the back steps of the medical bay. She was sitting alone, watching the horizon. In her lap was her father's letter. The ink had faded slightly now, but she still read it often, not because she needed to remember the words she had them memorized, but because it reminded her why she was still here. Ellis sat beside her without saying anything for a long time. Then, he finally spoke. "You know, your father never once bragged about being the best," he said softly. "But in every operation, every mission, we knew one thing. If Jack Blake took the shot, someone lived because of it." Cass didn't reply. She didn't need to. He looked over at her, more a mentor now than a commanding officer. "And now they say the same about you." She smiled, just barely, then shook her head. "I didn't do it for recognition." "I know." He reached into his coat and handed her something small. A patch. It wasn't a rank. It wasn't an award. It simply read, "Precision Protects." Cass stared at it for a long moment, then nodded once and tucked it away in her pocket. They never gave her a classroom. She never needed one. She taught by example. A quiet correction here, a single sentence there. She never talked down, never made a scene, and yet, her presence became the foundation of something stronger than protocol, trust. One recruit once asked her, "Coach Cass, why don't you just become an instructor, officially?" She looked at him for a moment, then said, "Because the best lessons are learned when you're not looking for them." He never forgot that. None of them did. That winter, during the base's closing ceremony, every department was called to the stage to recognize excellence in role. Medical staff, logistics, combat training, admin. When they called out Cass Blake, there was a long pause. She stood from the back, row modest khakis, no makeup, same ponytail. As she walked toward the stage, no one clapped. They stood, one by one. Even Doherty. Even the ones who once laughed. Not because she was famous, but because she had become proof that strength doesn't need shouting, and that silence doesn't mean weakness. It can mean wisdom, patience, power. That night, she returned to her small quarters. She placed her father's letter on the desk, set the watch beside it, and, for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to whisper 2 words she had buried since the funeral. I understand. Because now, she finally did. What he taught her wasn't about killing. It was about knowing when to act, when to stand up, when to protect even when the world doubted you. Especially then. Greatness doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears scrubs, walks softly, and waits until the moment truly matters. And when it comes, it doesn't shout. It simply delivers. If someone once taught you something that didn't make sense back then but saved you, later drop a simple line in the comments. I understand now. Because sometimes the people who shape us the most never ask to be seen. They just show up and stay ready.